Good night and welcome to Mindful Live, the Mindful Live 132. I am your host, Nathan Springer. Thank you for being here. I am streaming live right now over on TikTok, on Instagram, and on YouTube. If you are looking at this on TikTok or on Instagram, make sure you hit that like button. And you can feel free also to head over at some point in time to YouTube and subscribe over there, because you have the opportunity to see the lives on repeat over there with the chats and with the articles that I'm reading and all of that good stuff. All right, so we have quite a lot of stuff to talk about today. Quite a lot of stuff. I was mentioning that the live for yesterday was unfortunately postponed because of the inclement weather. You know, sometimes when the rain is falling just a little too hard, the rain messes with the audio and it really doesn't make for good listening. And also with nice, cozy, rainy, stormy weather, I wouldn't put up the opportunity to snuggle with my little child. So, yeah, Tobago was supposed to be yesterday and we missed that. Unfortunately, we'll talk about Tobago next week because Tobago has a lot of interesting things to talk about, as I was mentioning before. But there's also the stormy weather and some interesting stuff that happened along with that stormy weather that we'd get into. But first, before all of that, we're going to deal with Guyana. Because if you're looking at this over on YouTube, you're going to see the interestingly named title, and we're talking about who's the top of the Caribbean in terms of Guyana or Trinidad, because right now, Guyana has found quite a bit of oil, and it seems like in the forecast of the possibilities of all the oil Guyana may yet find, possibly they may be sitting on quite a hefty amount of oil, which is a lot of money in this present world that we live in. So the positions that once upon a time in the Caribbean, in CARICOM, that Trinidad fulfilled, maybe Guyana can be taking up some of those spots. Oh, True Ninja, what's the good, bro? What's the good? What's the good? Righteous Rebel says good night, everyone. Yes, welcome. Ria, can we talk about the fact that no self-proper work from home methods would have had us not in a frazzled state? That is very correct. That is very correct. If we had the proper work from home standards with this little flooding business and this inclement weather, it would not have mattered because people would have been able to work from home. I do not disagree. Very good point. Now, someone asked right before we started there, someone asked, is it possible to solve the flooding problems in Trinidad and Tobago? My answer was yes and no. Well, my answer should be no, yes, and no. It's more no than yes, actually. No, because flooding is part of the natural cycle of the water systems. A river isn't made to hold the most amount of water that would be flowing through it during peak times at the peak of a rainy period. A river is made to hold the median amount, the middle amount. What happens is the general structure of rivers and the riverine cycles and the surroundings of the river basin is that it is meant to flood. If over a certain amount of water falls from the sky, the river is meant to flood its banks. The water is meant to go through the flood plains, and really and truly humanity's existence through time, since like we started really pushing forward in civilization like 10,000 to 6,000 years ago, was based on that whole flooding of the river plain, of the river flood plain. That's where Egypt built their civilization. The river flooded its banks. It gave some nice nutritious soil on the outside there, and you planted stuff, and it got irrigated and all of that one time. So that's just part of the natural cycle. We cannot and we don't actually want to get rid of that part. So flooding is natural. That's one. Now, however, there are many things that can be done to mitigate the effect of the natural flooding. I think we need to seriously think about where we build residential housing. Like, I mean, there are people living on the flood banks, on the flood plains of the Caroni banks. I mean, like, if you're living there, I'm not blaming you necessarily for being there. Who knows how long ago your family put you all there. But if we're being realistic, if you're on the flood plain of the main river in Trinidad and Tobago, like at peak rainy season, I don't want you to be flooded, but the expectation, so I think there's some of that. We could more sensibly build housing and build houses with more purpose design. Like I remember in my social studies book way back, well, actually not that way back, I'm not that old, but back in the day, my social studies book in primary school, and I remember them showing us different styles of houses and houses that they build in areas like Caroni where may flood, and they show you the houses on the stilts and etc. and etc. And like people these days forgot that you could build houses on stilts now. So sometimes I'm driving through central region and like Boy Keto Road. I don't know how many of you know that road, and that Caparo region, and you see sometimes someone like they bought off a couple acres and they put their rest me Rooney, rest me, and they put their little road networks there and they build some houses. So they built their own little community and they're going to sell it to some little hapless stranger who doesn't know Trinidad and Tobago. You're going to buy a flat because that's what they build. They build a whole little community of flats in Caparo where floods every year. And they build these houses flat down on the ground. And I'm like, oh, like, first of all, maybe you shouldn't be building there. Leave there for the Caymans and the Dashin and the Edos and that kind of thing. Maybe. But if you must build there, build something on stilts. Thank you, Ria. I'm glad that you missed it. Ria, Nathan, fair point. But to be honest, you don't have to be near a river or floodplain to flood out in Trinidad. That is true. That is true. That's what I was saying also. There are other mitigation measures that can be taken. And to be honest, I'm seeing a lot of it being done. They're trying to dredge rivers, etc., etc. But when you're just building more houses, so when you look at the northern range, and mountains have a lot to do with how flooding happens because water comes rushing down from the mountains. Water comes rushing down from the mountains. So if water comes rushing down from the mountains and they reach to the plains, like imagine it, think about it. Water comes rushing down the mountains and then they slow down at the plains. Obviously, it's going to flood as it reaches the plains. That's just physics. And when you're building more and more homes on those mountainsides, and the mountainsides have less and less greenery, the mountainsides have the water now, from the moment the water falls, it lands on concrete surface, hard surface, runs over that surface and immediately ends up in some kind of waterway. Versus if there were trees, the water has to fall on the leaves, run down the tree trunk, run through the soil. When the soil becomes water saturated, then some flows underneath the soil and through flow, some goes on top and over land flow, then eventually into the river, and it takes a nice slow time so all the water doesn't end up in the waterway at the same time. So when we're developing more and more the mountainsides, these things obviously do happen, and part of what we're trying to do. So what we're trying to do in some places is widen the waterways. If we widen the waterways, they could take more water, and that is true. But here's the thing: if you widen the waterway here, but the waterway here remains the same size, then what's going to happen is more water comes here and then stops at the thinner point in the waterway, and you end up with the problem just at a different point. So you may have moved the flooding from one area in Trinidad and relocated it to another area. And even if you dug the entire waterway right out into the bay, what you call, not the bay, the Gulf, sorry, into the Gulf of Paria. You dug all the waterways straight out there as a nice wide channel. What you're going to do is then silt the whole Gulf. The Gulf is functioning on an equilibrium. Well, supposed to be functioning on an equilibrium. If you dig an entire broad waterway and send all the water rushing out into the Gulf, all of the silt coming down with the increased velocity of water is going to siltify the entire bay, and all of the nice little nesting areas for the fish gone. Then on top of that, you have the mangrove swamp that was supposed to be that barrier between the water coming out from the land and then the seawater bringing in the salt water. And as the tide rises, you have the brackish water mixing. Brackish is when the salt and the fresh water mixes, and you have that little spawning region for the fish. If you dig all of the river channels and broaden the water, then every time you're going to have that entire little biome there from the mangroves being destroyed when that peak water flow comes through the river. So it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. They can't just broaden all the rivers, and obviously you have to do something about the flooding. So the ideal is finding ways to actually live with what nature presents. So it isn't to try and find a way to teleport all of the water from the land into the sea magically, because the water has to be there. Find a way for us to live, allowing the water to do what it naturally does. So that's what I would think as more of a solution. What about the main roads and city areas? Is it due to poor piping infrastructure? Partly. You see, what you have to understand with some of that is some people planning back in the 60s may have, obviously would not have ever forecasted the world being what it presently is. So it's obvious some of the planning that was done wasn't done with the foresight of what is going to come out of the world. Like, if you think about some of the, I always watch the bridges. Like, if you drive through some of the rural areas in Trinidad and Tobago, you're looking at these bridges and it's like, obviously when they were building these bridges, they were thinking about people walking for the rest of humanity's existence, because they were building bridges one lane at a time. Like, you obviously were not thinking of the possibility of two Prados trying to cross the bridge at the same time. You obviously didn't have that thought in mind. And that's what went on even with some of the drainage. The drainage wasn't built with the idea of the sprawling suburban life that they created. And it may be insufficient, and it's hard now to come and bring infrastructure into the place where the people are already there, people are already living there, and you're trying to bring in infrastructure after the fact to help that. It's a more difficult thing to do. The building a set of little box drain. Oh my. The box drains are important, eh? As annoying as box drains might be, the box drains are actually important. Blessed night, Sig Trigger of Northumbria. His Imperial Majesty. You know something I find funny as you say that, Mr. Sig Trigger? Many of the people that are more on the side of the Rastafari and, you know, the more black power and the black conscious and he'll his Imperial Majesty, etc. They're very much against colonialism and the idea of the British Empire and the monarchy, etc. But you understand that imperial refers to someone who controls an empire. Like, Haile was an emperor. There were people, you know, being forcefully controlled by Mr. Haile himself. So, I mean, if you don't like colonialism and empire building and the monarchy, then, you know, His Imperial Majesty. But let me not dive in there. No, let me not dive in there. Let's leave that alone. Now, the initial thing we're going to talk about, at least starting talking about, you know, there's a lot to talk about, but just something that I found interesting to jump out with first is something I saw Mr. Imbert saying, and I believe he meant this a bit tongue-in-cheek, you know, a bit probably like slightly sarcastic, slightly satirical, but it was interesting nonetheless. It was interesting nonetheless. Listen to this. Imbert, let Guyana replace TnT in CARICOM fund. Let Guyana replace TnT in CARICOM fund. Minister of Finance Colm Imbert says Trinidad and Tobago could not sustain its contributions to the CARICOM Development Fund because it no longer had the revenues. Instead, he suggested it might be feasible for CARICOM countries to ask Guyana to take a more dominant role in this fund. Responding to questions from Point-of-Pay MP David Lee during the Standing Finance Committee in Parliament on Wednesday, on whether the $105 million increase in the CARICOM Development Fund represented arrears, Imbert said the fund was established in a time of plenty in 2006 and 2005 when oil was US $140 a barrel and gas was $13 US. And there was a view that TnT, because it was in a good economic position, should assist the less fortunate member states within CARICOM. Now, I think right there, wait, what went down? Good night, nobody care about, man. Ria, why are you saying that about Mr. Imbert? I find what he's saying here makes some sense. I think this should tell a lesson also. I think this should tell a lesson also that when you're up, you have to invest wisely. You don't just splurge and be a sugar daddy out there because you're up for a bit now. You have to consider the future. And you see, charity is a kind of unique thing. Charity is something that you try to give out of your own money. To give charity out of what belongs to other people starts to get iffy. So when a government decides that as a country, Trinidad earns so much, so as a country, Trinidad could afford to give more to CARICOM, and then 10 years down the road, that's not 10 years, that's nearly 15, 16 years down the road, you're in a little tighter position, but now you're bound into an agreement that you're the sugar daddy because you had things so good. That's probably not the smartest idea. Janelle Trim says, remember God loves you. Okay, that's good. But yeah, I don't have a problem with the suggestion that Mr. Imbert makes. If we are all, one Caribbean family, the Caribbean community known as CARICOM, now that Guyana is now more wealthy, I think they should pull their weight more. I don't see anything wrong in that. When Trinidad was the big brother and we had more of the resources, more was expected of us. So much was expected of us that I remember one particular government in Trinidad and Tobago, when more was expected of them from the wider Caribbean, one of our prime ministers at one point in time had the, what word to use there? What adjective to use there? Well, one of our prime ministers made the decision to let the rest of the Caribbean know we are not the ATM. We is not all your ATM. One of our prime ministers said that. That prime minister made sure to let the Caribbean know we aren't the ATM. But we still function like it to some extent. Maybe now, as Guyana, and Guyana, they're proud about it, they're vocal about it, which I have no qualms over. I mean, if you found newfound wealth, I don't think necessarily you should be ashamed of such. More power to Guyana. But Guyana is very proud about themselves, being in so much more of a strong position. And I agree. And as they're in a stronger position now, they can display their strength in the agreements on a CARICOM Caribbean-wide basis. How much money does the Caribbean islands owe TnT? I don't know. I don't know that figure. I don't know if there's a figure as such. That may be difficult. And as I was talking about Guyana, I noticed that the Trinidadian company, well, some Trinidadian companies are still finding some trouble over in Guyana. If you're interested in going back over in some of that in detail, you could head over to the YouTube channel, to my YouTube channel, Nathan Springer over there, and you could catch up. I think it was more than one session we did going through what is going on in Guyana, where Guyana is trying to protect their local companies, their local people, the natives of Guyana, Guyanese nationals, trying to ensure that they are able to benefit from their newfound wealth in the oil sector. And in trying to do so, one of the ways that Guyana is doing that is by making sure that some of the companies, some of the people that function in that oil sector must be from Guyana. They have a local content review board and all of that, making sure of that. And some Trinidadian companies, at least one, was going over, they went over there, and one of the things they did is, many of us would know that many Guyanese nationals lived in Trinidad for some time, and some of them had children in Trinidad, and some of those children now are heading back over to Guyana with their Guyanese citizenship, and using that Guyanese citizenship to open companies there and get around that local content law because they're Guyanese citizens. So they could own a company and still function in that industry. Now, one of our local companies, Ramps Logistics, we went through this, as I said. If you would like to go through it, you could go through on YouTube and search for that and find out the backstory there. But they're still in some struggle over in Guyana. And something that seems really strange about that every time I follow up on this story is that wherever Ramps seems like they're trying to make a little inroad on one side, it's like a whole other side prosecutes them. Is it or do we just assist with no expectation of getting back? I think there may be both of those. There may be both of those. All right. Ramps slapped with charges in Guyana. 5 days after Ramps Logistics Guyana filed an application for judicial review against the local content secretariat, it was slapped with 10 charges of false declarations by the Law Enforcement and Investigations Division of the Guyana Revenue Authority. Now, this story is over on the Daily Express. If you want to get into the details of it, it gets into a bit of the weeds in the details there. But I found it very interesting that what Ramps is doing, they're fighting on the legal side for this whole local content business because they have a director who is a Guyanese citizen, and they're still not being able to do business they're not giving them the certification to do business, and they're carrying that to court and they're fighting that matter. Good night, greetings, sir. And now, while 5 days after they carried the review authority to court, 5 days after, another branch, this doesn't have to do with the local content secretariat or anything like that. This is the Revenue Authority in Guyana. They came around and slapped Ramps with 10 charges. It's not the local content people found that they committed some kind of fraud in their dealings, and that's where that whole battle is happening between them. No. The local content people and Ramps are having their battle. As Ramps files the judicial review here, the Revenue Authority decides, okay, well, now we will charge you for something. Do you believe that all citizens of Guyana will benefit from the boom, or politicians only? I don't like those two options you gave me there, Mr. Jairam. I don't think all the citizens of Guyana are going to benefit necessarily. I think the majority of the citizens of Guyana are going to benefit more than they would have if they found no oil. They are going to get some benefit. But I think by far, politicians and people connected to powerful people are going to get the lion's share of the benefit. So in Trinidad and Tobago, nearly everyone in Trinidad and Tobago benefited to some extent, if we want to be honest, to some extent benefited from our oil boom, our oil and natural gas resources. Like someone someone was voice noting me about this recently, one of the mind folks here, and they were saying that one of the things Trinidadians seem to lack is understanding the context of certain things. Like other people in the Caribbean, they have to pay to write their CSEC exams, and we have it free, etc., etc., etc. So many people in Trinidad and Tobago lambast about the wastage of our natural resources. But at the same time, if you're being honest and you think about your life, generally speaking, just about every Trinidadian citizen would have had some amount of benefit as compared to other places in the world because of our natural resources. The problem being that the benefit was not fairly dispersed. Some people got the lion's share of the benefit, while some people got just a sprinkling, a little droplet of the benefit. And I'd presume much similar to that is what may happen in Guyana. And to be fair, what Guyana might be trying to fight here in this ramps logistics business might be just that. They may be trying to fight the fact that they may be worried that a Trinidadian company may be coming to make a lion's share of the resources in their oil and gas sector and carry it away. They may be fighting to keep those resources there. Oh, Shad. Now, the thing is, the funny thing in that is they may not be fighting for those resources to be shared up among the common folk in Guyana, because as we went through this before, this whole story, there's a local Guyanese company that does much similar to what Ramps is doing, and they have connections within the Guyanese government. So for all you know, the difficulty that Ramps may be getting on this side is because someone with connections wants their company to come into the place of Ramps. That may be all it has to do with anything. Sir says it would seem the benefits are coming to an end, justified or not. Well, they are slowing down, certainly. Guyana government might be just as corrupt as TnT, or more so, in fact. Empress says, are they though? Because they already stepping in our footsteps already. Yeah. All right. That's Guyana. That was just my interesting thought on Guyana there. But what seems to be mostly in the news for today was the rain and the effect the rain had. Now, there were 2 days of serious rain here. There were 2 days. What day is today? Today is Thursday. Tomorrow is Friday, right? So there was today and there was Wednesday. 2 days of serious rain. Wednesday, when the rain came down, school was in. People went to school Wednesday, and then the rains came down. And unfortunately, some of the schools started to flood. Persistent heavy rainfall yesterday left some school compounds underwater and school children seeking higher ground. Among them was St. Augustine Secondary School, Northeastern College in Sangre Grande, Presentation College in Chaguanas, Guayco Secondary and Trinity College, Eastern Trin City. The University of the West Indies was also affected. So, yeah, schools were flooded out on Wednesday. Yeah, schools were flooded out on Wednesday. Children had to go get picked up half day. But to me, I find some parents should have been able to, as it were, proverbially smell the rat, like a yellow warning. Maybe not send them to school. Maybe. But then, the weather system that caused the flooding Wednesday was still in our vicinity overnight Wednesday into Thursday. It was still here today. And our Ministry of Education waited till 7 a.m. today before they decided to make the announcement that there would be no school today. At 7 a.m. today, Minister announced schools to close. The Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service has just upgraded, this is old news, the weather alert from yellow to orange, and it was not the weather alert from yellow to orange. That was an error that the minister made. The riverine flooding warning was raised. It wasn't the entirety of the alert. But the thing about that is that announcement was made 7 a.m. If you as a parent were waiting on that announcement, your day would have been upside down. I think part of this whole thing shows how much the public education system and the public schooling, the nature of how we do schooling in modern time, has thwarted how parents should be thinking. You as a parent in charge of your child, here a storm happened Wednesday, the same storm is in the same area overnight into Thursday, and I'm going to send my child to school unless a bureaucrat politician tells me not to? I don't think that as a parent, you should need a politician to tell you how best to take care of your child. Because if we're being honest, the politicians are not very good at it. This 7 a.m. announcement was horrible. It was insane. Parents return for children as minister closes schools. At 7 a.m. today, Education Minister Nyan Gadsby-Daly announced that schools in Trinidad would be closed due to the inclement weather being experienced in parts of the island. However, many parents had already dropped off their children at primary and secondary schools. In San Fernando, people stood at the front gates at their schools eagerly awaiting their parents' return. The Express spoke with several children who were confused and afraid that their parents may not have gotten word of the closure. The National Schools Dietary Services Limited schools feeding program had already delivered breakfasts to schools. If you don't know that joke, you're not old enough. You need to know that joke. Classes were also suspended at different places. Parents expressed outrage on social media, saying many children leave their homes as early as 6 a.m. to get to school. And I understand the outrage from the parents' perspective. I understand that outrage. But that's because you're functioning in a system where you assume that if you follow everything that the minister and the ministry says, you'll go well. And that's the system that a country like ours has created. That you could live life on auto and the government would do that for you. The government tells you when to vaccinate your child. The government tells you at what age your child needs to start learning preschool. The government tells you at what age your child needs to learn the ABC, at what age your child needs to learn how to count, at what age your child needs to learn how to do this, at what age your child needs to learn how to do that, at what time your child needs to wake up, if it's flooding, if you should keep home your child, if it's flooding, if you should send your child to school in a canoe. Like, I mean, if it's flooding, do we really need the minister to tell you whether to leave your child home or not? I don't think that should be. I don't think that should be. I think that should be up to the parents. That should be understood as a decision to be made by the parents. And I think parents should be playing a much more crucial role in their child's education, especially considering the things that we learned during the pandemic, the style of education that changed during the pandemic. I would think that parents by now should have had a lot more time to recognize that the system isn't something that you could just throw your child in and at the end you're going to get a perfect child coming out. Now, this is the perfect segue into the ad for this evening, letting you know that we have started, well, we're starting this coming week here, the pod classes and pod learning over on Mindful Education. We have several streams starting from preschool. We have preschool, lower secondary, preschool, lower primary, upper primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary. Pod classes and pod streams available for all of those brackets. The general times are Monday to Friday, weekdays. You have 3 p.m. classes, then you have 5 p.m. classes. all days, and similarly on Saturday also. You have 1, 3, and 5 p.m. streams on Saturdays. If interested, no, these are in-person classes. If you're looking for online classes, well, you know where to look, Mr. Reese Hosine. You know where to look for the online classes. These are not online classes. These are in-person classes. What pod learning is, what pod classes are, is it's homeschool styled education. The idea is you're learning similar to the style of teaching that is done in homeschool, where you're aiming to have that comfort in teaching the nearly informal basis, and you have much smaller classes. The classes are on average around 6 students, so all students in the stream remain in the stream together, and they get to know each other, they get to know their teacher, so there's much more comfort in relation with the subject matter that you're learning. It's not based on age group per se, so you'd have mixed age groups, not wide ranges, but relative ranges of mixed age groups. So you have that rub off of children teaching children, so they feel more comfortable in what they have learned already, etc., etc. If you are so interested, as I said, Mindful Education, we have our page already up over on Instagram, mindful_education. If you'd like to go over there and follow, the contact information is also there. As usual, always, I've offered private tutoring. If you are interested in that, you can also message us over there, Mindful Education. And I think not only in the advertising side, but in the reality side, parents these days are supposed to be trying to pay much closer attention to their children's education. That's where the whole idea of pod classes bloomed and blossomed out of during the pandemic period, where people were recognizing that maybe the schools and the school systems that they gave their children to wasn't giving them everything necessary to educate their child in the manner that they wanted their child to be educated. They tried to take some of that into their own hands and recognize that the progress made by children in much more comfortable situations was way more than the progress made in school situations. So if you have ever done any kind of homeschooling, which I've done, you recognize that the speed of learning in homeschooling is way different than the speed of learning in public schooling with classes. The amount of matter, the amount of subject matter you could get through in a homeschool class in 3 hours, it might take a week to get through that same subject matter in a classroom. That's just the reality of it. So yes, mindful education for those who may be interested in such. However, by the way, the ministry says school is open tomorrow, Friday. So yeah, get your children to school tomorrow if they are in school. The ministry announced that already. No storm watch tomorrow. Now, something interesting I've seen added into all of this coming out from the HDC, because these are questions that, to me, questions involving the HDC are questions I've always had and always asked. Like, there are some things. Nope, what, Nisi? What you're saying, nope, to you're not sending your children out to school on the Friday? I wouldn't be surprised, because, you know, if you're home Thursday and the weekend is Saturday, Friday kind of automatically becomes a home day too. But you have school Friday, you should be out there to school on Friday. Now, HDC I've always had many questions about. We have a department in our government specialized, given the unique portfolio of ensuring people get housing in this country. People get a home to live in. And yet still lots of people are homeless. Well, not homeless in the living on the streets version, but homeless in not owning any home of their own. In this country, people under 50, it's a struggle. You listen to anyone talk about it, it's a struggle. And it seems like something that is just out of reach for many people. When you look at the prices of homes versus the salary that you're getting, you're like, the math's not mathsing here. This doesn't go into this, or this takes too long to go into this. 6,000 cannot go into 1.6 million. The math's just not going. It takes too long for 6,000 to go into 1.6 million. It just takes too long. So the HDC, the minister in charge of the HDC has recently come out to say that, they have some intentions for how this might change. Robinson Regis, HDC homes to be more affordable. The HDC will build cheaper houses and not compete with the private housing sector. Housing Minister Camille Robinson Regis told the House of Representatives in the budget debate on Tuesday. She said housing units should be affordable to people on the HDC's list of applicants and include a certain level of standardization and economies of scale. And so we are revising the construction models to simpler scaled down units and to also allow for units for rental. The HDC had definitely moved away from its moorings. The HDC had come to a point where it started competing with the private sector, almost to the point of pushing the private sector out. She said a public-private partnership model will be used to build affordable homes. Now, I agree with the intent she's talking about here. I agree with the intent. HDC should be building more affordable homes. I don't disagree with that. Fine. But they're saying that the HDC, they're looking to build scaled down units. And that the units that were recently built, I guess, would have been their scaled up units. And as many of you may be familiar in the chat who are here regular enough, I am in construction. A lot of the business we get is trying to make sense of HDC houses after people get them and recognize the houses do not make any sense. If those were scaled up houses, I shudder at the thought of what might be scaled down houses. Have any of you seen HDC houses? I have yet to see an HDC house that looked anything close to scaled up, personally. Can someone inform me of where these scaled up HDC houses are located? I'd like to see some. I have a friend who waiting for 17 years for HDC. 17 years is a small thing. I'm sure people waited till they died hoping for some kind of HDC house or something of this such. The HDC is moving back to producing rental units. Units at a reasonable mortgage price, at a reasonable purchase price, and units that are more in keeping with the type of housing that those who are on the list and want houses can easily afford. Now, this is something that worries me. You see this paragraph here? This is a paragraph that worries me. Because as I said, if the houses that they were building in the last decade or so, if those houses were scaled up, what do they mean by scaled down? And HDC is moving back to producing rental units, units at a reasonable mortgage price, at a reasonable purchase price, and units that are more in keeping with the type of housing that those who are on the list and want houses can easily afford. I'm curious to know what type of housing they mean. What do you mean by type of housing? Because when I hear governments like the PNM speak about type of housing like that, the idea I get in my mind is La Hoqueta, is Maloney, is John John. It's the creation of ghetto communities. And this isn't a knock at those communities, it's a knock at the planning of those communities, where you take a large number of low-income families and stuff them into very tight quarters. Humans are not supposed to be living like sardines on top of each other. People need space. You have all of these many families in a very small location, and then surprised when gangs pop up. You create the atmosphere for gang creation there. And is it that when the housing minister speaks about type of housing here, is it that they're talking about creating more areas like those areas? Because those areas were created with the same kind of mindset that the PNM always seemed to have had, that we need to create housing for the low-income people. And the kind of housing that low-income people can afford is if we build really tight, packed-in housing projects and give them dog-cheap rent. And then we could put them all in there and say they have a home. No, 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 no. You have a ghetto. You look nearly anywhere in the world, and that's how you create a ghetto. That is how you create a ghetto. Something that I've always wondered about. I've always wondered about this. The government owns all state land. State land cannot be sold. That's in our laws. You cannot sell state land, it can only be leased. So the government owns all this land all about the country. If you want people to get homes to live in, why not give them the land and the same mortgage and allow them to build a home themselves? You could have pre-approved plans of different sizes. Why build the home for the people at obviously inflated prices and with shoddy workmanship packed in areas? Like, who does that benefit? Really, who does it benefit? As we speak, the HDC is in discussions with Ansa McCall Group, which will see the construction of several houses at a cost of between $250,000 and $400,000. And this is in the Aruka area. HDC is at this time also reviewing a number of PPP proposals, which are expected to yield significant units in the coming years. She said most houses delivered by the former People's Partnership government had been built under the earlier PNM administration. And these houses were built at an average of $400,000 to $650,000, much cheaper than what they eventually built houses for under their administration. Robert, now listen. I have seen the houses, and I could tell you those houses, even as is, they don't seem to be worth anything close to $650,000. Just by the way. At Cypress Hill Union Hall, the average cost of a 3-bedroom unit was $1.4 million, putting a strain on the HDC and leaving 258 units incomplete. We have been in the process of completing them. The famous Eden Gardens, where they paid $175 million for the land, resulted in an average cost of a unit being $1.6 million. She said at the Oasis project, each unit cost an average of $1.4 million. I know the Oasis project for sure. I know that one for sure. No way anything in there is supposed to cost $1.4 million. Maybe the government shouldn't be in housing. Maybe that might be part of the problem. Let the government distribute the land in the same way you're distributing it with HDC. Who needs places to live? Yeah, you get a place to live and you build something to live there. I think the quality of what they build would be more. The quality of life would be more. You give people something that they can grow in. Like, I'm thinking to myself, if you get a home in a place like Maloney, if you get a home there and your family is growing, there's nothing you can do to grow your homestead. You are locked into this little concrete cub. It's not even like you could buy out your neighbor and knock down the adjoining wall. It's not even like that is possible. Like, how do you grow? You don't. You stay there, locked into this little box, and you cannot move from there. How is that beneficial? That's not what people need. I really hope that when the minister talks here about building the type of housing that these people require, I really, really hope they're not aiming to do some more of that. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Is there any way you've seen low-income housing where you've packed in people tightly and it doesn't create a more ghetto-ish area? It's like the manuscript, the blueprint on how to create a ghetto. I people do, but that's kind of based on history, and I think many people, if given the opportunity to own a home on their own piece of land, will willingly leave the East-West corridor. Many people will. And maybe some people would choose to stay in the East-West corridor, and more power to them. Stay in the traffic and the fumes. But I'm sure many people will willingly leave if given the opportunity, especially to own their own land. Listen, to get cheap land to build their own home, there are people who go and live in Piparu just to get the cheap land available. To be able to have your own home where you could build the boundary, build a wall, keep people out of your area. Your area is your area. That is so important. When you look at the slum areas like Sealots, like Laventille, like Beetham, one of the problems in many of those areas is people cannot have privacy. If your family is here, it's very difficult for you to lock your family away from the neighbor. The neighbor is inside of your life constantly. The land in Las Lomas is increasing in price. Las Lomas was very cheap a couple of years ago, but several people bought land there and the prices increased. And Las Lomas isn't even like all that best value style land because there's the possibility of flooding in that region. Yet still the land sells. People would like places to live. People would like places. They need places to live, not just would like places to live. But yeah, a big part of it, I think, like I've always watched that as a young child growing up also. Susulans, there are still Susulans out there, but most of the Susulans have already been bought up. People already are living there. But yeah, something that I've watched growing up, and it seemed to me like that was one of the recipes. You don't give people enough room. And then one of the things when Laventille and Sealots are prime real estate, yes, they are, but moving the people that are currently there is an issue. And yeah, making sure people have room. And another problem when you have so many people packed into a tight area is gang warfare becomes much easier. Like something I mention regularly. In areas where you don't have as many people packed in tightly, it's just a numerical problem in trying to find those gangs. If you have one nuclear family living in one lot of land and you have that separated on blocks, it's much harder to find a gang of high numbers. If you have a gang on this block, to find all the wayward boys who would be willing to join a gang, you might find 6 fellas. And if somebody do a drive-by and kill 2 members in the gang, that's a third of the gang dead already. But when you have those more ghetto-styled areas where you pack people in really tightly, then you have that numerical thing also where you hear people talk about gangs in Trinidad in the hundreds. Like, how are so many young men having the ability to meet each other and bond in those times? Because those areas are packed. If you ever walk through Sealots, Laventille, Beetham, and you see the number of people that live in small areas, in small places, you're like, That's a problem. And I really hope that the government isn't aiming to create more of that in saying that they're creating housing. All right, folks, that's all I have for this evening. Are there any further comments or questions, or would we call it a night? Seems like there are no further questions or comments. Thank you, sir. If not, I hope you guys were educated, informed, or entertained. And I will see you tomorrow. There's another Mindful live tomorrow at Friday at 9:15 Friday. And repeat the mindful education. Mindful education. Mindful, it's not spelled incorrectly. It's a play on words. Mindful with 2 L's. Mindful_education over on Instagram. If you're looking for that page, mindful with 2 L's _education. Go over there and you can follow me over there, follow us there, and join for the and register for the classes. We're offering pod learning classes from preschool, lower primary, upper primary, lower secondary, upper secondary. What the pod classes are homeschool styled classes where you have small groups averaging around 6 students per class, and they're usually mixed age. And the aim is to teach with that homeschool atmosphere where you have more comfort in learning, where you're trying to get to know the students and understand how they learn. Because one of the things, I've been a tutor for quite a while now, a tutor and a teacher for a couple of years. And one of the things in my style that I've used in teaching, especially private tutoring that I've done, is I've recognized that people obviously don't learn the same way. And in classes that I've taught in school, when I've taught classes in secondary school, and you look across with a class of 30 plus students, at 30 plus students, you look across a class, you recognize that all the students are not understanding what you're saying. Now, I can craft my lesson for some of the students to understand, but then some may not understand in that way. And if I craft the lesson for that group to understand, this group may not understand. And it's just impossible with the number you have and the different style of learning that different children have. So if you're able to get down to a smaller number, you're able to open their own creative curiosity, because children are naturally curious. All children learn. They pull themselves to learn new things. So if you are able to open that natural creative curiosity, make learning fun for them, make children learn through play. That's what play is for children. If you could make nearly all learning seem playful, even though it isn't necessarily play and discipline would always be involved, you're able to make them interested in the learning so they pull themselves through. And that's a lot of what we're aiming to do with the Mindful Pod learning classes. That's a lot of what I'm aiming to do. If you are interested in that, you can head over, as I said, on Instagram there, follow us there, and register if interested. More teachers, smaller classrooms, correct. And not necessarily classrooms. You see, I could do an entire live on this, because obviously I've thought about this for some time. Pay your NIS, soccer. I'd say pay NIS nonetheless. You could do both, but I'd say pay NIS nonetheless. Yeah, as I said, I could talk about this for a long time. And part of what we're aiming for isn't necessarily the classroom, because public education and the style of education that we have now didn't always exist. That was something that was created mostly in the 19th century, and there was a reason for it. They wanted an industrialized world where you create more people similar and able to fit into that industrialized system. Education before was, for one, partially a luxury for wealthier people, and it was much more specialized. So your child would have a master. They would have their master who would teach them, and they would teach them more specifically down the lines that they would be benefited by in further life, and along the lines that they would understand better. So that's more of it, not necessarily in the classroom lane, but in the lane of more education, learning. Not necessarily a classroom, just about education and learning. The way the government going, I feel by the time I'm ready to retire, it may not have money in that fund. That's the truth. That's the truth. I'm not surprised that you feel that way. But paying off the NIS might help in other ways, you know, making sure that your self-employment is all above board. All right. If that's all for now, folks, I will see you guys tomorrow, as I said, for the next Mindful Live, 9:15 tomorrow, Friday. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you guys then. Peace. Peace.